If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 10 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that 2 dirty bombs, or possibly a suitcase nuke, will explode in Manhattan, New York City on March 22nd, 2025. There will be a large-scale evacuation from Manhattan Island. Martial law will be declared in the U.S. I am predicting that on April 26th, 2025, Israel will bomb, possibly with nuclear bombs, Iran's nuclear and energy weapons facilities. It is also possible that the U.S. will also bomb Iran alongside Israel on April 26th. I am also predicting that a nuclear bomb will be detonated on June 8, 2025. It is possible that April 26, 2025 is a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date that Israel will bomb Iran on June 8th. It is also possible that June 8th is also a step in the trail of signs leading to another date in the future on which Israel will bomb Iran and a date on which a nuclear bomb will be detonated. If that is the case, we can expect clear and relevant prophetic signs to occur on April 26th and June 8th. It is predicted that on June 9th, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons, and it is possible that June 9th will be the day Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. At some point, there will be a massive Mary apparition that will deceive the masses, because all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist, and 5G frequencies. June 9th will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. If June 9th is not the date for these events, there will be a relevant prophetic sign or prophetic signs, which will make June 9th a step in the trail of signs leading to the date of the symbolic beginning of these things. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. It is predicted that on August 6th, 2025, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for over 100 years will finally break free and crash over Niagara Falls. The reason for this is that Niagara Falls is Noah's flood symbolism, and the barge was involved in the most dramatic rescue in the history of Niagara Falls, symbolic of Noah's Ark. Niagara in the native language means straight, narrow way, and Niagara's Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the CN Tower in downtown Toronto, because Toronto and its tower are symbolic of the Tower of Babel. In a game of horseshoes, the object is to aim the horseshoe and throw it at the metal stick, which is why the Horseshoe Falls is perfectly aimed at the metal stick that is the CN Tower. God is communicating that as testament for those who will live in the 1,000 years of Christ's reign on earth, the geography of North America will, as a result of a massive earthquake, be divided by a body of water from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi Delta. This destruction will be judgment on America and Canada for attempting to divide God's land, Israel. When this happens, the water in the Great Lakes will spill out over southern Ontario and Toronto. I am predicting that a solar flare will erupt on the surface of the sun and send a coronal mass ejection that will hit Earth on August 13th, 2025, which will knock out America's power grid and will lead to food shortages. The hit of the coronal mass ejection, predicted for August 13th, that will knock out the power grid will also knock many planes out of the sky. I am predicting that on August 30th in the North America time zones and on August 31st in the Asia time zones, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the east coast. The asteroid will also trigger a mega landslide on Hawaii Island that will trigger a mega tsunami that will hit the west coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. She will stack the Supreme Court, and she will appoint Barack Obama as her vice president, and then she will step down, making Barack Obama the 50th president. This is speculation, but it could be that there will be a movement to make Trump the president for a third term, arguing that he is eligible because he hasn't served 2 consecutive terms. And if so, this will backfire, as it will lead the way for Barack Obama to serve a third term that isn't consecutive. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. Unless there are multiple rapture events, the resurrection rapture event will not occur before Pentecost on June 4th, 2028. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived, and more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Make a note right now of these alternative platforms that you can find me on, in case you can't find me later. All right, welcome. Words can't describe how important this video is. What I'll be talking about, the conclusions, what God is communicating through his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, which will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass that 2 dirty bombs will explode in New York City on March 22nd, 2025. In this video, I will prove, among other things, that NATO is behind this. Make sure you watch all of this video to the end. I'll be explaining 2 very important diagrams, this one and this one. And let's get into it. Maybe we should start with the founding or the foundational biblical principle here, which is that God forbids military alliances regarding his nation, Israel. America is un-Israel. America is God's chosen nation. It is Israel 2.0, if you will. When the Jews rejected Israel, God left Israel and went to the Gentiles, and America is God's Gentile nation that he used as a nation of disciples to spread the gospel around the world, and now it has. Jesus said he would return when the gospel had gone around the world. Even the remote tribes in the Amazon have now heard the gospel. Anyway, the point is that America is God's nation, which is, for example, why he created it in between 2 massive oceans for its protection. And when Israel didn't rely on God and instead relied on military alliances, whether it be with Egypt or the Syrians, God judged Israel for it. And a very good example of this is 2 Chronicles chapter 16 in the Old Testament. All right? And so that's the foundation here. And that's why, biblically, NATO is sin and evil. In other words, Satan, the ruler of this world and the promoter of evil, is involved in NATO. NATO is a manifestation of satanic work, if you will. And it is coming to a climax. This satanic entity called NATO is a big part of the end times that precedes the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, which will be preceded by the arrival of the Antichrist. And there are 2 Antichrists described in Bible prophecy. The second of the 2 is Barak, which is why 2 Chronicles 16 hints at 216, and that is the equivalent of the name Barak in English gematria. Okay, and Barack Obama was also born on the 216th day of the calendar year. And also, 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which, of course, is the number that symbolizes 666 being the number that symbolizes the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. This is, by the way, why NATO was founded on the date 4/4, which hints at the 44th president, Barack Obama, who will soon be the president again, leading NATO and whatever form it takes in the near future in the end times. So God is using these 4-4 dates, including exactly 4 plus 4 plus 4 months after the creation of NATO on the date 4-4, which is 4-4 in 1950, the day that the UN Trustee Council officially recommended that Jerusalem be made an international city, which is exactly what the Antichrist will do, lead the world in making Jerusalem an international city in the end times, the biggest transgression against God as described in Bible prophecy that the world will do. Jerusalem isn't an international city. It is God's city. The world is evil. That's biblical. That is the biblical worldview. The world is furthermore ruled by Satan. And so the nature of man and the world is corruption. That's the biblical worldview. The opposite of the leftist worldview, which is that man is essentially good. And it is external influences, the environment, that causes man to do bad things. But in fact, the complete opposite is true, which is why the leftist worldview is Satan's worldview. It is satanic. The left is evil. They are in rebellion against God, and their rebellion against God is founded in their erroneous worldview. But the point here is that that erroneous worldview about the world is why we have NATO. Anyway, so we have NATO founded on this date 4-4 in 1949, and let's see here. The birth of Barack Obama was also on the 4th day of the month in August, which is also 4 plus 4. And that was exactly 148 months after the birth of NATO. Okay, by the way, North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Gematria equals 444. It's 444 in simple English gematria, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, but in reverse, and God does that. So it's reverse simple English gematria, 444, which hints at the 44th president, but also G 444 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word for man. And again, in the biblical worldview, the true worldview, man is inherently corrupt and does over time corrupt things. Because it's easy. It's a challenge to do the right thing all of the time. It's easy to take shortcuts and not do the righteous thing at all times. Anyway, so 148 months is relevant because 148 is the 113th composite number, which means a non-prime number. And G113 and G131 are being pointed to frequently in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections with the number 113. That's why this is an important number. G113 is the word in Greek that means lawless, wicked, unprincipled men. And G131 is the word that means blood disease, which is what a person gets when they take the mark of the Antichrist, which Bible prophecy says if one takes, they will go to hell. And the vast majority of people, including the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians, have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. Fortunately, the Bible does not say that one cannot repent after having taken it. Now, the 148th composite number is 192, and this number symbolizes Obama. The name Obama is equal to 192 in English gematria. The sum of 148, the sum of the divisors, is 266, and that's because the first of the two antichrists is Pope Francis, the 266th Pope. And he too will be leading the world, including this NATO organization, in the end times. Now, the end times is symbolized by 7 plus 7 because of Joseph's dream in the book of Genesis, in which he dreamed of the 7 plus 7 cows. Okay, I'm not going to get into any more than that. And that's just, if you don't know the story, you should look it up. And so it's 7 plus 7 cows in the dream that symbolizes the end times, the second 7 cows, the second set of 7 cows is symbolic of the period of the end times of 7 years, but it is only symbolic. Don't expect a clear, distinctive, every quote-unquote Christian will recognize the first day of the end times and the 7 years. Like, unfortunately, most Christians that are interested in prophecy are expecting, but they don't even know what they're expecting. Okay, and I say that because we are already in the final 7 years. All right, and anyway, when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove that. That's the purpose of the prediction, make no mistake. I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction. And the reason for this video and God's big picture. Anyway, let's just put it that way. The big picture, the prediction will prove the big picture of signs, which clearly indicates that we are inside the final 7 years. Anyway, so that's why it's exactly 70 plus 70 months from the birth of the Antichrist to the day that the Twin Towers were officially opened. And that's a 2. It's a 2 sets, right? So that's why 2 sets of 7 cows. Also, when the Twin Towers collapsed, there was the famous story of the Maasai tribe from southwestern Kenya, where Barack Obama was born, donating to America 14 cows. Literally, it was 14 cows. This Maasai tribe, I'm sure, did not donate 14 cows because they read the book of Genesis. But it was 14 cows. You can look it up. It was a major story. It was a heartwarming story at the time for the world anyway. For those that are wise, they recognized it as a sign from God, indicating that this is the end times. But the point here, too, is that it is 2 sets of 7 cows, and we had 2 planes that struck 2 towers on 9/11. Anyway, so it's 70 plus 70 months exactly from the birth of Obama to the birth, if you will, of the Twin Towers. And again, this Twin Towers, the World Trade Center, connects with the birth of NATO, this globalist world organization that God forbids entangling with. And I use that word actually because George Washington warned, I think it's a quote, he warned of, quote, entangling alliances. All right? But through the 9/11 events, which of course was when the Twin Towers collapsed, God pointed to George Washington. All right? And jumping ahead, that will be explained more up here. All right? Now, so in other words, through the World Trade Center, which eventually collapsed, God was pointing to George Washington, who warned of entangling alliances. And up until the mid-20th century, America had, as part of its DNA, it's part of its culture, an ethos of isolationism, of not entangling in alliances. But World War II changed that, And Harry Truman changed that, and that birthed NATO, which, as I'm explaining here, is evil. And I will prove through this prediction and this diagram connecting NATO to the prediction that it is in fact NATO and the Department of Defense of America that will be behind the coming bombs that will be exploded in New York City. And we can obviously know why this will happen. It'll be for the purpose of destabilization because of the threat from the current administration to the longevity and future of NATO. In other words, God is using Trump for many things, including his King Jehu from the Bible, a type for King Jehu, who came wildly, erratically, to become king of Israel, just like Trump came into the office erratically with his campaigns, right? And Jehu then destroyed the deep state, if you will, and vanquished the enemies of God. Okay, so that's why NATO is currently threatened, because America is in the process of ending NATO for a very good reason. All right, and that's not appropriate for the Department of Defense and NATO and the government that seeks to survive. Like all organisms seek to survive, so do government agencies. And like all organisms, they constantly seek not only to survive, but expand and grow and become stronger. It's exactly the same as an organism, but it's the same with a political organization or government agency. This is, for example, why communism and the CCP, for example, constantly need to expand. If you're not expanding, you're dying. And so NATO needs to expand. And in the process of expanding, it's brought about its own demise because it was not supposed to expand and promised Russia that it wouldn't expand when Russia agreed to give East Germany back to Germany, that it wouldn't expand 1 inch. That was promised by the US. But of course, repeatedly, over and over again, that has been violated, that promise. Because NATO needs to expand, just like all organisms do, otherwise they are dying. And it needs to survive. It wants to survive. And through the years, it's entrenched in its organization, those that are committed to its survival, ideologues, for example, that truly believe in the cause, otherwise they wouldn't be there, right? That's just the nature of it, just the same as the CCP. The true believers, the rise to the top, the true globalists, and that's what we're really getting at here, the globalists. The true ideological globalists are at the top levels of the US government and NATO. This has been the focus of the US government for many, many decades. Globalism. It even predates World War II. But NATO really symbolizes this. This is where it really gets going. It got going really at the beginning of the 20th century with Woodrow Wilson, the godfather of progressivism, which is evil. Progressivism, progressive politics, the left is evil. But we have now manifested in this evil in NATO, this globalism, right? And so you have, anyway, I think I've made my point. It needs to survive. It's entrenched. It's got all kinds of corruption involved with that because of all of the secrecy, and secrecy breeds corruption by definition. And that's why we have what you would call a DEEP state. That's what it is. It's the result of decades of secrecy and globalism politics. NATO, okay? So NATO is threatened. They were threatened with Brexit and they were threatened with Trump. And then because of those advents in 2016, they internalized their focus, and like they had been doing with other nations for decades, focused on regime change within these nations and within America. It's focused on regime change within America. It is waging war on America, on American citizens, on democracy. The big farce, of course, is that the left is guilty of everything that they accuse others of. That's the classic communist playbook. And they are the ones that are guilty of waging war on democracy, right? And it is the center-right, Trump and others, that are attempting their very best to save it. If you are on the left and you are listening to this video, please make no mistake. The reason for this prediction is to prove the things I am saying. It is time to wake up and repent. You are on your way to hell. And you are on the way to following the Antichrist. You are already a follower of the Antichrist, the spirit of Antichrist. Okay, now let's continue here, because the Twin Towers were officially opened 62 times 7 months exactly before Barack Obama went to Egypt. Of course, the dream that Pharaoh's dream that Joseph had, Pharaoh's dream that Joseph interpreted was in Egypt. Pharaoh was the second in command in Egypt, just like Barack Obama will be the second in command of the Antichrists after Pope Francis. Anyway, 62 times 7, because that is an equation that is central to the most central prophecy in the Bible, in Daniel chapter 9, the 62 sevens. Okay, so that gets us to the exact day that Barack Obama delivered his Cairo, Egypt speech, where he went to Cairo to deliver a speech in order to tell the Muslim world that America is no longer a Christian nation. And that's exactly what he did. Of course, that's what his speech was about. Okay, and that's because he is the Antichrist. That's why he would do that. He is Antichrist. That's why he went to the Muslim world to tell the Muslim world, hey, come on, give us a break now. We're not the same as we used to be. We're not a Christian nation anymore. Cut us some slack. That was the message. Okay? Because, of course, Islam is, obsessed. The truth about Islam is that it is obsessed with how Jesus was just a prophet. And it is a religion designed by Satan in order to counter Christianity. That is the truth about Islam. Now, so Barack Obama went down to Egypt. And by the way, speaking of alliances that, God forbid, the first Isaiah chapter 31, verse 1 is, woe to those who go down to Egypt. And that's exactly what Barack Obama did as soon as he became the president. He went down to Egypt because he is Antichrist. And furthermore, he'll be leading the alliance here of NATO, this globalist alliance. All right, and so that's symbolized by Isaiah chapter 31, verse 1. Woe to those who go down to Egypt. And the rest of the verse is, and rely on horses. And that's, by the way, this is a tangent, not relevant to this video, but that's the reason for the Triple Crown winner, American Pharaoh, the first Triple Crown winner in 444 months, because of the 44th president being the American Pharaoh. Because if you don't know, Pharaoh in the Bible is a type for the Antichrist. Okay, now, Barack Obama went down to Egypt on June 4th, 2009, exactly 189 months before Trump's recent joint Congress address, the State of the Union address, and in which part of was mentioned Ukraine and Zelensky. Now, Zelensky, speaking of Zelensky, Zelensky, right before the beginning of the war, he had just turned 44 years old. And at the time, his nation's population was 44 million. That's because God is using Zelensky as symbolism for the Antichrist, the 44th president. But the Antichrist 44th president, his name, Obama, is equal to 32 in simple English gematria. And that's why the sum of the divisors of 189 equal 320, which hints at 32. But also the word bomb is equal to 32 in simple English gematria. And that's because also Obama hints at bomb. And we are talking about this trail of signs leading to the predicted bombs in New York City. Okay, so, which will be 6 + 6 + 6 days after trumpet, God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs, trumpeted Zelensky's letter to Trump that he wrote in the State of the Union speech. Okay, now Obama went to Egypt exactly 134 months before the Beirut explosion, when the fertilizer silo exploded on Barack Obama's birthday, which triggered an earthquake that was felt in Israel. Maybe Egypt too, actually, but I meant to say Israel. 134, the 134th prime number is 757, and that was the model of plane that flew into the Pentagon, which is where the DOD, which is NATO. NATO is America. The DOD is America's military. In other words, this hints at NATO and the DOD, for that matter. Okay. Speaking of the Pentagon, a Pentagon is 5 sides. We have exactly 55 months from this Beirut explosion to Trump's speech trumpeting Zelensky's letter. All right. And by the way, that's significant. Zelensky's letter is the end of the story, really. It's the beginning of the end of the story, because in the letter, if you don't know, I'm sure you do, he capitulated. In the letter to Trump, he said, whatever you want, I'm ready to sign. Let's go. That was after the explosive argument in the Oval Office. Zelensky repented in the letter, and that's why the letter is important. And Trump read from the letter in the address, and so that's why the connection. Okay, so 55, though, is also the equivalent of the name Satan in simple English gematria. Also, the word Satan is mentioned 55 times in the Bible. Okay? All right. So, and again, this is the birthday of the Antichrist here. Okay. So that's this bottom diagram here, trail. Let's go through this now. The Vandenberg Resolution. This is important because it was unconstitutional prior to this for America to engage in military alliances, because America was founded on a relationship with God, and Washington had a relationship with God, George Washington, I mean. And from George Washington's warning until the Vandenberg Resolution, America refrained from entangling alliances, as Washington put it. Okay? So the Vandenberg Resolution was passed by the Senate on this day, which paved the way for the president to be able to make military alliances. It was the Senate Resolution 239. Now this is this confirms it's prophetic. This is a number God uses because of a couple of reasons. One, it is the 52nd prime number, and 52 God uses because it is 2 times 26, and 226 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word that means prophetic sign. Okay, so this confirms it's a prophetic sign. But also, God pairs 9 and 23 together frequently to confirm the signs and connections. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses that confirms a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 23. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. And one reason being is the basketball president who wore 23 in high school was inaugurated in 2009. And also the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized in Ezekiel chapter 9. And the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's 23 chromosomes. Also, God pairs 44 with 9 and 23. And NATO, which is what the Vandenberg Resolution was for, so that NATO could be created, was born on the date 4-4, which hints at 44. Furthermore, it was in the 80th Congress, which is 40 plus 40, which hints at 44. So the 80th Congress hints at 44, and it pairs with the 23 and 9 in the SR9, Senate Resolution 23-9, the Vandenberg Resolution. Okay? Now, it's interesting. It's exactly 4 weeks after the birth of Israel, and NATO again was born on the date 4-4. And NATO, I'm sure, will be playing a role in making Jerusalem an international city. Like I was saying, right? So that's the point. That's why exactly 4 weeks. The 44th president is the Antichrist that will lead the NATO, born on the date 4-4. That's why he's the 44th president. All right. By the way, Barack Obama was born exactly 690 weeks after the birth of Israel. And 69 is the number in the most central prophecy in the Bible that points to the timing of the arrival of the Antichrist and the beginning of the end times. All right, now, this was the 80th Congress, and the Vandenberg Resolution was exactly 888 months before this date. But let me see. Before we go there, let's go this way. So the Vandenberg Resolution on June 11th, 1948 was exactly 639 months before 9/11 in 2001. Okay, 639 is the 253rd composite number, non-prime number, and that 253 is equal to 9 times 11. 253 is the 9 times 11th prime number. In other words, this connection to 9/11 has embedded in it the numbers 9/11, which confirms the analysis. Furthermore, 9/11 was the destruction of the World Trade Center, and as I'm explaining, the Vandenberg Resolution, which led to NATO, is this globalist world organization that is anti-God. It's actually also analogous to Genesis chapter 11, when the world came together to build a tower to heaven without God. That's why also the Twin Towers resembled a giant 11. It pointed to the tower in Genesis 11. And anyway, that's what's symbolized with the world coming together in the globalist movement, NATO. Okay. Now, like I was saying, through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington. And I've known this because of what Jonathan Cahn has discovered many years ago. But now what I'm also saying, which isn't explained anywhere, is that one of the reasons why God pointed to George Washington was not only what I'm about to explain, but also because he was pointing to how Washington warned of entangling alliances. NATO. Okay? God pointed to George Washington. Now, how did he do that? Well, the capital of America was Lower Manhattan before Washington, D.C., and Washington was inaugurated in Federal Hall on Wall Street. Today, there's a huge statue of Washington outside of Federal Hall on Wall Street. After his inauguration, he marched down Wall Street and into Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which it did temporarily on 9/11. Washington would know more than anyone that that would be the case. He saw the hand of God on his army in the Revolutionary War, and he knew full well that there were a number of instances in which the U.S., the Patriots, should have lost and would have lost had it not been for the miracles that God performed. And why did God perform these miracles? Well, to demonstrate exactly what I'm explaining. That the nation is protected by God, and that is the reason for the success and protection of America. And as Washington said, when America turns away from God, it loses or will lose its divine protection and blessings. Since the warning, which was what 9/11 was, America has not returned to God, but raced exponentially even further away from God and is now about to be destroyed. It is in the process of being destroyed. Okay? And we could get into it, but God bless Trump and God bless the MAGA movement, but this isn't what God means by turning back to him. Right? It's definitely positive. Don't get me wrong. But the problem is, truthfully, the church. It's not even non-Christians, it's the church. God, as Peter said, judgment begins with the church. In fact, the big reason for the number of non-Christians and the rebellion in America is the church and its light, which isn't being shined because, well, it doesn't really have much light anyway. It's not even like some will say it's shining its light within its four walls. As Jesus said in the to the church of Laodicea, he is not even inside that church. He is knocking at the door. God, Jesus, isn't inside the American church in general today. God is very, very displeased. This is the reason for the end times right now. It is judgment for the church. And we could even get into why that is. What is wrong with the church? Well, what is wrong with the church is its doctrine. And people will say, well, I just love Jesus. I don't need to know about doctrine. Well, it's not true. Furthermore, one's love is deepened with the more knowledge one has of God. And so, contrary to what you would call anti-intellectualism within Western culture today, especially the church, doctrine is important, and it is the root of the bad tree that's producing the bad fruit. And that doctrine is Reformed theology. And once saved, always saved. and the myth of imputed righteousness as evangelicals understand it. And our righteousness is as filthy rags, and saved by faith alone. The only place in the Bible that occurs, that phrase, is when James said, "You see, for we are not saved by faith alone, but by works," which, of course, today the evangelical has a phobia of because of their doctrine. Anyway, that's another subject, and that is explained in the 23 Church Signs video on his channel, arguably the most important video on his channel if you are a quote-unquote Christian. Now, Washington was born on the date, well, okay, I didn't finish that. The church that Washington went into was the only building at ground zero that had survived the falling debris, which is why God pointed to it and thereby pointed to Washington through the 9/11 events. Today, that chapel is called the Miracle Chapel because of what I just said. And it was saved by the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted in the process of sheltering the chapel. And in Isaiah chapter 9:11, it speaks of the uprooted sycamore trees, which is the exact type of tree that was uprooted. Furthermore, it was a 70-year-old sycamore tree, and after the warning that Israel and Judah didn't heed in Isaiah chapter 9:11, Israel was then exiled to Babylon for 70 years, and Israel was destroyed. Okay, so that was why the tree was 70 years old. And that story just goes on and on and on, right? That's explained by Jonathan Cahn, for example, with the harbingers. Now, so God pointed to George Washington, who was born on the date 222, and that's why before March 11th, back in November of 2019, I was documenting, saying, predicting that something very big, bad, and world-changing would happen on this day, and that's exactly what happened. This was the day that the W begins with a W, ends with the middle letter H, and ends with an O. Organization officially declared the CVD disease to be a pandemic. Okay, and anyway, let's cut through this. 9 months because it symbolizes birth pains. The number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. As from the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment. But also, when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. The average human gestation period is 9 months. This is symbolic of the end times. Also, God pairs 9 and 22 together because the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist, which is related to the CVD disease. And the mark of the Antichrist is described or alluded to in Ezekiel chapter 9. Anyway, moving on. This day here was the day that this organization begins with an F, middle letter D, and ends with an A. Approved or so-called approved the mark of the Antichrist, and that was the day that Trump trumpeted it in the Oval Office. It is the mark of the Antichrist, which is associated with the number 666 in Bible prophecy, and that's why the mark of the Antichrist was approved exactly 6 plus 6 plus 6 months before June 11th, 2022, when the helicopter on Mars flew for 66.6 seconds. Mars is the red planet. The helicopter in God's signs, helicopters symbolize the dragon in God's signs, and Revelation chapter 12, which is thrown down from heaven to earth, which is why when the helicopter descended from the second heaven space to the red planet Mars, by the way, the dragon is red in the book of Revelation. All right, and so that's why Mars. And also, this was the same day that because of a freak, rare heat event in Kansas, 5 times 500 cattle died. Cattle is symbolic of branding, which is what a mark is. It's like branding. What has happened is that the snake venom that is in the mark of the Antichrist has been inserted into people's chromosomes, and the snake is the biggest symbol in the Bible of evil and Satan. That's why they have been marked. But they've been branded. That's why the cattle sign on this day on the day that the helicopter flew for 66.6 seconds, 6 plus 6 plus 6 months after the mark of the Antichrist official beginning. As you can see, for those that still don't believe that the mark of the Antichrist is the thing, the prediction will prove it. That's the purpose of this prediction, make no mistake. I know far better than you the reason for this prediction, and it is to prove that it is the thing in its current form. It does not need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or false form of religious worship. In fact, those that are wise will recognize that there was false religious worship with it and taking it. And also, it does not require a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is, in fact, judgment for this particular doctrine, which is the Nicolaitan doctrine that I was beginning to speak about earlier. The doctrine that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. Also, the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy are answered in the must-watch snake bite video on this channel, but make no mistake, when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove what I have just said, and that is the purpose of this prediction. Make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for why God has given me a voice through this prediction. So, in other words, end of debate. No more discussion, case closed, period. Now, as I mentioned earlier, 55 is equal to Satan in simple English gematria, and it was 5 times 500 cows. Also, by the way, 500 is in the concordance, the Greek word is Antichrist. So it's 5 times 5 months exactly after this Antichrist sign here with the Mars helicopter to the day that Zelensky visited the NATO summit, the historic or rather symbolic or whatever, the 75th anniversary NATO summit in Washington, D.C., the headquarters of the second of the two Antichrists, the 44th president, which is again why Zelensky, just days prior to the beginning of the war, turned 44 years old at the time that his nation was made up of 44 million people. Before there was an evacuation, and that's exactly what will happen when the bombs explode in New York City. There will be an evacuation. That's why one reason God is using Zelensky to point to all of this, because of the exodus or the evacuation from Ukraine at the beginning of the war. Again, this is a NATO war. It was instigated by NATO. NATO is responsible for the war. It is NATO's fault. This not, by saying this, is not Putin propaganda. If you believe that, you are the one that has been propagandized. You are the one that believes in lies. You are the one with the soft head. You are the one that is gullible. You are the one that is deceived. It is not Putin propaganda to say that NATO is the one that is responsible for this war. It goes back long before 2022. It goes back even before 2014, but in 2014, NATO orchestrated a coup of the democratically elected leader of Ukraine, who was a supporter of Russia. All right? So learn some history. It's not difficult. You just need to stop listening to the sound bites from the mainstream media. And listen to those that are trying to tell you otherwise instead of just dismissing them. Because they know more than you, although you think you know so much because you are on the left and you are enlightened and you follow the mainstream news, which is the respectable news. It's not. It's all controlled by what I'm talking about, the corruptive tentacles of this blob of left ideology and corrupt corporations that are entangled in the government. It's propaganda. All of these mainstream news agencies are all owned by the same one corporation. Well, Vanguard and BlackRock, but even those two own each other. And they all have a stake in not only the war, but the mark of the Antichrist, which is also, by the way, a DoD NATO operation. That's another story. But it is. The prediction will prove this. I don't need to explain it. You're blessed with me explaining things. All I need to do is say, NATO is evil, it is behind these things, and the prediction will prove that. And that's all. I could make a 30-second video. But I'm doing you a favor by explaining all of what God has demonstrated to prove this. In other words, I'm explaining how it is that I know, but I don't need to. I have the authority to tell you these things when the prediction comes to pass. The mark of the Antichrist is a DoD operation. I will actually leave a link in the description box below. Okay, I will leave a very important video that will explain this, not made by me. If I remember, and I often forget, and if I forget, please remind me. You can leave a comment and remind me, but I will make an effort to leave a link in the description box below. But if you are watching this on the YT channel, I don't think I'll be able to do that. You shouldn't be watching this on the YT channel. If you found this channel if you found this information through that, you need to, as I recommend, jump over to the other free speech channels, okay? Now, so what I was saying is that, you need to get off the mainstream media. It's not what it was 60, 70 years ago, right? It's completely corrupt. Okay, anyway. Now, so Zelensky, the NATO summit went for 3 days, but this was the day that Zelensky was welcomed and visited and officially and all that, right? So that's why this date, July 11th, 2024, which is this Satan connection after the branding and the Mars helicopter sign, okay? In other words, as I'm saying, God is using Zelensky for symbolism for the Antichrist, the 44th president. That's why NATO also, because of course the 44th president, when he becomes president again, will be leading NATO. That's why from this day we have this 4 times 40 day connection, which hints at Zelensky, 44. This is a second witness confirmation. This is how it works, as I explained. Second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter. Also, God pairs 23 with 44, as I explained. The basketball president who wore 23 was the 44th president. 4 times 40 days is also 44% of a year. Anyway, that's second witnessed with the Zelensky connection, because Zelensky is symbolized by 44. Now, this is another Zelensky date. This is the day that he met the leader of NATO for a talk on December 18th, 2024. Now, why was that? Why were they having such a big deal about this talk on this date? Well, because this is after the election that threatens NATO. Trump threatens NATO. And so, but for good reason, NATO and Zelensky are very worried. And so they got together to reassure each other that things are going to be all right. We're going to be able to continue this corruption and our ideology. Don't get me wrong. It's not only about greed. It's about false religion. Okay? Now, and I mean that literally. For the left, politics has become their religion. As Chesterton said, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And so we have all these false religions, which come in the guise of left politics. For the left, which doesn't believe in God. And if you are a quote-unquote Christian on the left, let me tell you, you are not a Christian, period. It's an oxymoron, right? In other words, there are many churches today that are leftist politics with a cross. That's it. It's leftist politics with a cross. It's not Christianity. Anyway, And that's a different subject. There'll be the evangelicals in the Church of Laodicea that think highly of themselves because they're not in part of one of these liberal leftist churches. But no, that's not the case. Like I'm saying, God reproves whom he loves, and God is knocking on the door of the evangelical church. The left church isn't even that's not to say that there aren't saved people within those churches either. God made that clear with his letter to the church of Sardis. But they're far and few between. And anyway, they're probably in a state where, out of tradition, they don't leave. But they disagree with everything going on around them. Anyway, that's another subject. So let's finish this, though. This Zelensky date on December 18th, 2024 is 94 days to the date of the predicted bomb that will be detonated by, essentially, NATO. Okay? Of course, they're not going to do it themselves. They will have other actors. Who knows what's going to happen? I do not know. But what I do know is what God is communicating through his signs. And I do know that it'll be smuggled, the plutonium or the nuclear material will be smuggled into the country, obviously from the former Soviet Union. That's also been communicated in his signs. But it's not like NATO is part of this, okay? The DEEP state is a part of this, okay? And it's just like the CVD disease, the shoplifted referendum, the lawfare, all of these attempts to bring down Trump because of him being the threat that he is to their existence. It's an existential threat. Trump is an existential threat to NATO, and this is like somewhat, if you will, maybe a Hail Mary pass with this disruption that's coming with these bombs that'll be detonated in New York City. Why is 94 days relevant? Well, because 4 divided by 9 is 0.44. And Zelensky, again, is symbolized by the number 44. This 94 days is also 13 weeks and 3 days, which hints at 133, the 44th semi-prime number, a number that is divisible by only 2 other numbers. Other than 1 and itself, okay? A semi-prime number. So there's multiple ways in which the number 44 is embedded into the number 94, and that's why it connects with Zelensky, who's symbolized by 44, which again connects with 4 times 40 days and 44% of a year to this other Zelensky 44 date, and on and on. What we didn't do here, though, is this big connection right here. From the Vandenberg Resolution, which created NATO on the date 4-4, which hints at the 44th president, in the 40 plus 40th Congress, which again also hints at the 44th president, with SR 23-9, which hints at the 44th president who wore 23 and was inaugurated in 09. It is exactly 913 months to this Zelensky summit, the big symbolic NATO summit in Washington, D.C., the 75th anniversary, 913 months, because G913 in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word name, Barack. That's right. Barack Obama. Okay. Now to the second diagram. This is so amazing. Hopefully you made it this far. If you have, it's just going to get even more amazing. All right, I was just getting warmed up there with the first diagram. So, where do we begin here, actually? Why don't we begin right here? This is amazing. This is so important. It was, first of all, before I even explain the signs on September 26th, 2022, let's talk about how I knew this date big time, ahead of time. But to be fair, a lot of those that are interested in Bible prophecy or end time signs were also somewhat aware of this date, but not for the reasons that I knew. but because it was the Feast of Trumpets. Okay, so it's one of the 7 feasts in the Bible. So anyway, but there were a lot of more reasons than just it being. In fact, I discovered, no. I take that back. Anyway, this date was actually, I was aware of this being an important date now that I'm thinking about it, since the summer of 2021. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. It was either, it might have been, no, I don't think it was. I was going to say the summer of 2020. But anyway, it doesn't even matter. The point is I knew of this date being very important a long time ahead of time. And, but you know what? The first way I knew about this, from at least the summer of 2021, is that this date is exactly 2,222 days after the very close Jupiter-Venus conjunction in 2016. And I didn't know back then that this date would be Jupiter's sign. I should have written that in here. 2,222 days from the astronomical sign to this, which included this date, which included another astronomical sign, which was the closest approach of Jupiter in 59 years, which is why it was exactly 99 weeks after the 59th referendum that was shoplifted. Okay. Anyway, I'll explain that in a second. But the 2,222 days connection got us to this. This wasn't, of course, known that it would happen ahead of time, but it ended up being the day of the DART, 2 asteroids and the 2 Nord Stream pipeline bombs. Okay, so DART. DART is NASA. It stands for Double Asteroid Redirection Test. They were trying to redirect an asteroid using a probe by smashing into it, theoretically causing it to change its trajectory and its orbit. I don't think they were successful. I could be wrong. But it was a double asteroid system. In other words, the 2 asteroids are orbiting each other, or one asteroid is orbiting the other. But it's a double asteroid. And that's why 2,222 days. But what's amazing, and I didn't even realize that until just now, is because of this connection right here. From the double asteroid and the 2 bombs, we have 2 years, 2 months, and 22 days to this date that I mentioned in the last diagram, which was when Zelensky met the NATO leader for this emergency talk because of the recent election of Trump. Okay? Amazing. Now, but what also we have here is bombs. And again, we are predicting 2 bombs in New York City. And this is, by the way, is one reason why. This is one reason why I know or believe that it'll be 2 bombs in New York City. Because of the bombing of the 2 asteroids and the bombing of the 2 Nord Stream pipelines. And the Nord Stream pipelines were bombed by NATO. They were bombed by America, which is NATO. They were bombed by the Department of Defense, which is NATO. I wouldn't even be surprised if there were other NATO countries aware of this. We know for sure that Norway was aware of it. I think Denmark too. But, and we know for sure that it was America. The U.S. did it. And that was because of the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Seymour Hersh, who has been known for many decades to have highly reliable, high-level contacts within the Pentagon. All right? And so he broke the news. It's It's all true. If you don't know that because you've been watching the brainstream media, has anyone invented that before? Because I didn't hear that before. I might have just coined a phrase, the brainstream media, because you've been brainwashed by the mainstream media. If you never heard that before, pass it on. We need to start calling it the brainstream media. Anyway, which is controlled by the DOD, right? That's why you would not hear about that, which is also why, which was absurd at the time, the mainstream media, which is on the left, started bashing Seymour Hersh. I forget his name, if it's Hearst or Hirsch, who is a longtime man of the center left, right? And so it doesn't matter, though. When you come against the agenda, you'll be thrown under the bus. Anyway, that's the truth. And the prediction will prove it, if you don't believe it, that when the 2 bombs go off, it'll prove that NATO and the Department of Defense blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, all right? The 2 bombs, because there was 2 pipelines that were bombed, right? Okay, now, what also happened on this day was news broke of the chess cheating scandal. I made a video about this, and it's a must-watch. This chess cheating scandal was the beginning of a 10-day or so period of all of these cheating scandals. But it was a major scandal in the chess community world. The #1 chess player accused an opponent of cheating. Huge scandal in the chess world. And but that happened in all of these other worlds. The biggest poker cheating scandal, the biggest Irish dancing cheating scandal, the biggest, what was the other ones? Fishing tournament cheating scandal. You might have heard about that one. There was even the cheating scandal for that game that they play in the South where they throw the beanbags into the hole. It's called corn something. Anyway, maybe it's called cornhole. I don't know. But there were so many cheating scandals, like high level, like biggest ever in their respective sports, that there was the media was talking about how this was a coincidence, how all of this was happening at the same time. And I'll give you the reason why. It was all a big prophetic sign from God, because one of the things that happened during that 10-day period was Aaron Judge, the New York Yankee baseball player, tied and then beat the home run record set by Roger Maris. Roger Maris in 1961 hit 61 home runs. And that's because the Antichrist was born in 61, but that's another story. And in 1998, there was the home run derby, or the home run race, or whatever it was called, between Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire. And they ended up beating the home run record of Roger Maris by a large amount. 70 runs and 66 home runs, and that's also Antichrist. But that's another story. I'm not going to explain it all here. The point is that the home run, the biggest news, the biggest media event, arguably in baseball of the 20th century, was the media following around these 2 players for that whole season, or the second half of the season, when they were chasing Roger Maris's home run record. It was a really big deal, in other words, in baseball. All right? There's so much to be said. There's so many amazing details regarding it. I could go on, and I've explained it in another video anyway. But the point is that it was cheating. Okay? And how did they cheat, incidentally? Through taking a thing. They took a thing and put some stuff inside themselves. But they used a thing, and that's because it's symbolic of the thing that is the mark of the Antichrist. All right? But getting back to the cheating aspect, that's the reason why Aaron Judge was in the news. He beat Roger Maris's record, which was 61, in this 10-day time period that I'm talking about. In doing so, it ended up pointing to the cheating scandal of 1998, the biggest cheating scandal in baseball history. So you had all of these cheating scandals in this 10-day period, the biggest in their respective sports, but it also ultimately pointed to the biggest cheating scandal in America's pastime. In other words, it symbolized America and cheating. Baseball. It pointed to the cheating in baseball. That's why all of these cheating scandals happened when they did, and the media even reported on the coincidence. But now I'm telling you the reason why. It is again to point to the cheating scandal of baseball, which symbolizes America, which symbolizes the corruption in America, which was inevitable after having departed from God. Which is why the founding fathers understood this fully. And John Adams said that what we have created is wholly inadequate for any other people other than religious moral people. They all said similar things. They all understood this, and it's true. That's why it's the end of democracy. But it's from the atheist left. Again, like I said earlier, the left accuses everything that they are guilty of. They are the ones that are restricting free speech. They are the ones that are shoplifting referendums. And it's not like the shoplifted referendum a few years ago was the first one. They have a long track record of shoplifting referendums in their corrupted cities, which is how the one in the year 2020 was shoplifted. It was in just a handful of cities that have a long history of shoplifting referendums. Okay? Anyway, they are the totalitarians of the day, right? And but it's all because of corruption and cheating. That gets me to this next point, which is why the closest approach of Jupiter in 59 years was exactly 99 weeks after the 59th referendum, which was shoplifted, okay? And number 9 is the most important number in God's signs. It's from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. But Aaron Judge of the New York Yankees wears jersey number 99. Again, this cheating scandal was part of the first one of the cheating scandals that all pointed to Aaron Judge, who wore jersey number 99, which is why this cheating scandal was exactly 99 weeks after the cheating on this date right here. And if you don't believe me still, when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove it. Okay? You have been deceived. When the prediction comes to pass, it is time to wake up. That's the point. It is time for you to take a new course. It is time for you first and foremost to repent and ask for God's forgiveness. Now, the shoplifted referendum, which was 99 weeks after the cheating scandal in the chess world, was exactly 999 weeks after Flight 11 flew into the Twin Towers on 9/11, which was the World Trade Center, which symbolizes globalism, which is why the Nord Stream was bombed by the globalists in the DEEP state within the US government and Department of Defense, NATO. What's also very interesting is that on this day, the Dow closed at 29,260, and this hinted at the date 9/26 in 22. Okay? We have the 9/26, the date 9/26 in the 29,260 number, because if you separate the 20,000 from, you get 9,260, which gives us 9/26. We have the year 22, and that hints at the 20,000 and vice versa. But also, separating the 9/26 from the 20,000 hints at the number 2, 20,000, which is on the same day as the 2 Nord Stream bombings and the 2 asteroids that were bombed. This asteroid bombing was exactly 926 weeks after the Indian Ocean tsunami, and that is because the predicted asteroid will hit the Indian Ocean. That's described in Revelation chapter 8. God's signs have been clearly indicating that it will hit the Indian Ocean exactly 153 weeks after the Indian Ocean tsunami. But it connects to the asteroid on the date 926 with exactly 926 weeks. H 926 in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word dismay, alarmed, terrified, and that'll be exactly the case when the asteroid hits the Indian Ocean. 153, because this is one of the 3 unusually specific numbers in the New Testament, and it symbolizes the end of the age of fishing for men. Long story short, the significance of this number 153. In Jesus' last miracle, 153 fish were caught in the net. 153, though, is also 9 times 17. And the Antichrist was president from 09 until 17. And Constitution Day in America is on the date 9/17. And the president who was president from 09 until 17 was the unconstitutional president because he was born in Kenya. And that's a fact. When the prediction comes to pass, it will prove this. All right? And now, let's see. Okay. So we've explained this now. Let's go from here. As I was saying, the 2 asteroid hit bombing and the 2 Nord Stream pipeline bombs that were 2,222 days after the 2 planets conjoined is 2 years, 2 months, and 22 days after this date that I mentioned earlier when Zelensky met the NATO leader after the 2nd election of Trump. And that's why they met. So that's another 2. They met because of the 2nd election of President Trump. Actually, he's been elected more than 2 times, as we know. But anyway, 2nd presidency, let's put it that way. Okay. Now, I explained this earlier, the 94 days. Zelensky is symbolized by 44. 94 hints at 44, as I explained. That gets us to the date of the predicted 2 bombs. 2 dirty bombs in New York City. Which is, or will be, 22 days after Trump and Zelensky met for the 2nd time personally after having been elected, had an explosive argument in the Oval Office. By the way, that's amazing. I didn't realize that. That was the 2nd time they met. Wow. This is another 2 in the 22 days. Yep. Wow. Okay. Now, this date of the trumpet, God uses trumpet to highlight trumpet his prophetic signs. The trumpet Zelensky explosive, as in bombs exploding, Oval Office interview is 2 years, 5 months, and 22 days. 2 years, 5 months, 2 days after the double bombing by NATO of the Nord Stream pipeline. Okay? That's significant because God uses these numbers to hint at the most central prophecy in the Bible that speaks of the period of the end times, which is symbolized by 2,520 days. That's why 252. This is also, though, 29 months and 2 days, which hints at 292, which in octal base counting, and octal hints at 4 plus 4, is 444. 292 is also the 230th composite number, in other words, non-prime number. And as I mentioned earlier, God pairs to confirm his signs and connections, the numbers 23 and 44. And so we have this 230th composite number, which hints at 23, connected to the Zelensky meeting, and Zelensky is symbolized by 44. So you have multiple second and third witnesses confirming this connection here. It's amazing. Okay? Now, the day that Trump and Zelensky had their explosive Oval Office meeting, this is a typo or an error, was 33 weeks and 3 days, which hints at the Trinity bomb. God is using this, okay? Incidentally, 94 is the 33rd semi-prime number. Anyway, it gets us to the first day of the 75th NATO in Washington, D.C., because it was from the 9th to the 11th. And on the 11th, well, let's not go there yet. The first day of the summit is exactly 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 days. In other words, 4 to the power of 4, which hints at the 44th president, before the date it is predicted that the 2 bombs will explode in New York City by NATO. That's an amazing connection, by the way. This is a prophetic NATO event. It's not just a NATO event. It was in Washington, D.C., and it was the 75th prophetic anniversary of it, but it was attended by the man who symbolizes the Antichrist, because the Antichrist is the 44th president. Okay, anyway, 33 weeks and 3 days, Trinity bomb, gets us to the Trump-Zelensky meeting. Now, 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 days gets us to the bomb, which will be done by NATO, and NATO will be a part of the rise of the Antichrist. Okay. This pairs with the 23 right here, by the way, because again, God pairs 23 and 44. And so it's 23 weeks exactly from the predicted bombings to the predicted bomb, or rather asteroid, in the Indian Ocean. By the way, the reason it'll hit the Indian Ocean is that the biggest seismic effect from the asteroid will be felt on the opposite side of the globe, which is where America is. Now, from the day that Zelensky, symbolic of the Antichrist, and by the way, he's the first Jewish leader of Ukraine. That's more a hint that NATO, led by Obama, the 44th president, will persecute Jews in Israel and make Jerusalem an international city. Okay, that's why Zelensky is the first Jewish leader, and God uses firsts for prophetic signs. One reason being to point to the first affirmative action president, Barack Obama. Now, so on the same day, though, that Zelensky attended the NATO summit, Shelley Duvall died. She starred in The Shining, written by Stephen King, Antichrist King symbolism. And long story short, which I made a video about, it's an amazing video. Don't even misunderstand. You need to watch the video. I'm not explaining anything. But ultimately, the hotel in the movie points to the hotel that was used by the Nazis when they officially declared the final solution. The Wannsee Conference. Okay, and I'll explain how that's all true, how Shelley Duvall's death points to all of that in the video. But given that that's the case, that makes this hint at World War II, which is why NATO was created. NATO was created after World War II because of World War II. Shelley Duvall, in other words, points to World War II. That's another reason why Zelensky visited the 75th NATO summit on the day that Shelley Duvall died at the age of 75. All right? Now, so her, and The Shining is evil too. It's hinting at the movie is about demonic possession, and what's coming for those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist is mass demonic possession. Okay, and the name Satan in Hebrew gematria is equal to 232, which is why the NATO summit and the death of Shelley Duvall, this Antichrist sign here, is 232 days before the trumpet Zelensky meeting, the explosive meeting in the Oval Office that's hinting at the explosions by NATO in New York City. You get it? Trump is the threat. Zelensky symbolizes this. Ukraine is all for the purpose of making this happen, the rise of the Antichrist. That's why it was the quote-unquote by the media saying explosive argument. It's because of the coming explosions by NATO. Do you get it? Well, you will get it when the prediction comes to pass. Now, again, Zelensky is symbolized by 44, and that's why it is 4 times 40 days. And I already explained this connection before, I think, to the day that Zelensky met the NATO leader in a nervous, reassuring meeting that they had, okay, because of the election of Trumpet, the enemy of NATO, the enemy of evil. Get this. From the words from the wisest man in America, you could say, today, Dennis Prager, who came to the realization, which is true, which is why it's so wise, because we just know it's true. Those who don't fight evil, fight those who do fight evil. That's just the way it is. It's human nature. You could argue that it's built in, there's psychological reasons for that, for why those who don't fight evil fight those who do fight evil. But that is exactly what is going on today with our quote-unquote culture war, which is really a spiritual war. It's a religious war and a spiritual war, but it's rooted in those who don't fight evil, fight those who do fight evil. And that's why the left and NATO and everyone are fighting Trump, and that's what the intention of this destabilizing bomb scenario prediction is will happen. That's the reason for it. Okay? In other words, this wouldn't be happening if Biden were still president. I think I might have missed one connection here, which is this one. The Zelensky Antichrist meeting here is 2 times 6 times 6 days to this Zelensky meeting with Trumpet. And that's because the first of the two Antichrists is the 266th Pope. And also, this is 72 days, which is at Genesis 7:11, which symbolizes the beginning of destruction. Because it's the day that that's the verse in the passage in which the flood began. Now, speaking of the flood, it lasted for 150 days, which is why this 150 weeks connection. But this connection is also 25,200 hours, which is again what I said earlier with this number 2,520 symbolizing the end times. That's this number. This connection gets us to the day that NATO sunk the Moskva. Ukraine sunk the Moskva, but it was NATO that sunk the Moskva, the flagship of the Russian fleet, the battleship in the Black Sea. That was on the 110th exact anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. It was 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. Anyway, this was the day also that Mike Bossy died the Hall of Fame hockey player who played his entire NHL career with the New York Islanders, the Titanic was on its way from Great Britain Island to Manhattan Island. The Moskva, the reason for the prophetic significance of it is because at the symbolic beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, it took Snake Island. It's snake venom that is in the mark of the Antichrist, which is symbolized by the number 22. Mike Bossy died after taking the mark of the Antichrist. The number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist because the mark of the Antichrist is, the inverse of it is in the book of Ezekiel, which would have been a Tav letter or a Tav mark, the 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the last letter in the alphabet. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. And also, the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes. Chromosomes come in two arms and come in pairs, a 2 and 2. Also, speaking of Snake Island, that's this date right here. I should even put here Moskva. If you recall, that's the famous time when, or infamous day when the Moskva blasted to the soldiers on the island, surrender, and then the Ukrainian soldiers gave them the finger and told them to, expletive off. And that became the big news, right? That's the symbolic beginning of the Ukraine war. And God is using the Ukraine war to point to the BIO laboratories that are for weapons funded by the US in the Ukraine. And if you don't believe that's the truth, you have been brain-streamed by the media, the brain-stream media. You've been brainwashed. Okay? There's all kinds of evidence for that, even in the mainstream media, but it's just clouded, right? It's a fact. Like, for example, what I mean is that this came out in congressional testimony, which you can find on center-right mainstream media, but you won't find it on the left mainstream media, right? Because there's actually a few, center-right mainstream media. Don't need to name them for you if you don't know who they are. Anyway, that's the reason why God pointed to that, is because these BIO laboratories in this third most corrupt country in the world, that's why NATO had their laboratories in that country, by the way, because they thought they could get away with it. But God exposed all of it through the Russia-Ukraine war. That was the point of it. We now know about all of these laboratories because of the Ukraine war. That's the reason for the war. Do you understand what I am saying? God is using all of this to expose these things, and these things are exposed, and the truth of the thing that's supposed to counter the CVD disease is that it is a DOD operation. Like I said, I'm just remembering again, I'll leave a link for that. And that DOD was operating the research for this in Ukraine, in their BIOWEAPON research, okay? Which uses snake venom, which is why Snake Island on this day. Anyway, there are many connections to confirm that God is, to the CVD signs, to the first date of the Ukraine war, that confirms all of this, right? But when the prediction comes to pass, it proves everything that I'm saying in this video, the controversial things. And make no mistake, that is the reason and purpose for this prediction. It is to prove the controversial things that I am saying, and I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction. Please make no mistake. Now, I did make a video about this a long time ago regarding these many connections to this date. Go back and find that video. When the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every video on this channel. every minute of every video. But anyway, what we have here too is this exact 1100 days connection. And that's symbolic because it hints at 110. And Joshua died at the age of 110. And Joshua led the Israelites around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. And they collapsed in God's judgment after the Israelites blew trumpets. Trump is God's trumpet. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet, to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs. And he trumpeted prophetic signs here with the explosive argument with Zelensky, the type for the Antichrist, in the Oval Office. Okay? This is the Oval Office we're talking about. This is a big deal. This is what makes it prophetic. It's his second meeting with this figure, this thug, this crook, this punk, Zelensky, that ripped off our nation and is responsible for thousands of deaths and the destruction of his country. All right. But that being said, he was gullible to believe the promises from the ideologues, the globalist leaders of the European nations, and Biden promising, security and encouraging the fighting. They're guilty with this guy. Okay? And so, you know what? I'll just give you I did actually mention it earlier. The history of this war, the big lie, one of the biggest lies in Western civilization history is that gets repeated, and that's why it gets repeated, by the way. Propaganda requires it be repeated repetitiously over and over and over again to drill into the soft heads of the people buying the lie. The lie is that the Russians were unprovoked and they're the aggressor. That's the lie. That's why you keep hearing it over and over and over again, right? It's a lie. There's way more to the conflict. And they were provoked as well by the Nazi militias, and that's the truth. And I'll just give you one thing about that. The BBC, the big leftist organization, the big propagandists, they made a documentary in 2014 about this issue, about how the government in Ukraine was run by Nazis. You can't find that documentary on the YT channel anymore, the platform anymore. You can still find that documentary, I'm sure, on Rumble. Because they eliminated that because it doesn't serve the narrative anymore. The cult, the false religion of Zelenskyism, Ukrainism. It's a cult, it's a religious war, it's a religion, and so they had to eliminate that sort of thing from the internet. Anyway, the majority population in eastern Ukraine is Russian-speaking, and they're aligned with Russia. But you had the Nazis provoking them and threatening them and killing them in that region. And Putin, at least he says, needed to go in there to protect them. And there's no reason to disbelieve that because we know that that's exactly what happened. The Nazis in eastern Ukraine were there to provoke. It's all evil. It's all evil. It's the opposite of what the left believes. Everything is the opposite. And it's not Putin propaganda. Just because you say that sort of thing doesn't mean that you are aligned with Putin. That's more propaganda in itself. Okay. Oh, and by the way, the reason for this being relevant is because it was the border crossing. So the big thing about Trump is borders, right? It's all about borders. It's all about sovereignty of the individual, furthermore. And it's all about, furthermore, the theme of the Bible, slavery and freedom, which is why Satan, his prerogative is to make slaves of people through breaking down their sovereignty as an individual with rights such as free speech. so that they can become slaves. Communism, leftism, progressivism is only leftist politics is incremental communism. Stalin rightly said that progressives, liberals, lefts, the people on the left in America are simply useful idiots. They are. They're useful idiots. It's incremental communism or slavery, in other words. And the point is that's what this whole thing is about. From the tariffs, from the border wall of security, it's all about the book of Joshua and the border. And it's also about the thing. When you put the thing inside yourself, you are invading your border, which is your body. And it goes, and even in our body, we have cells that have borders. Borders are designed by God to keep the integrity of the cell, of the organism, of the nation, of the people. Satan's job is to break down those borders, which is why the globalists are evil, which is why those that promoted the things are evil. They're working for Satan. They don't know it, but like Jesus said, those who are not for him are against him. Like Dennis Prager said, those who are not fighting evil are fighting those that are. Okay, I think I said enough here, but 1100 hints at 110, which is symbolic for Joshua and borders, which is why the connection here is valid, because we have Trump, who's all about borders in various forms, as I just explained, to the day that the war began over the Russia-Ukraine border. All right, it's been about 24 hours since I recorded the video here. I thought I would just add a couple more things. I think I forgot to really explain 150 weeks, because that's relevant. As I said, the period of the flood was 150 days. But the sinking of the Moskva is flood symbolism, right? It's a boat, just like Noah's Ark. It's in the ocean, etc., right? Oh, and you know what? Actually, I didn't even realize this until I started recording here. And I've been thinking about it, and just adding a couple more things here. And it just dawned on me now, though. This is the Black Sea. This is the location of the flood. There are those that think that the flood was worldwide and the entire earth was covered with water, but that's not what the text says. And there's all kinds of evidence, including archaeological evidence that and geological evidence that the Black Sea was flooded when the Straits of what's it called? The Isthmus? Anyway, the strait between that cuts Turkey in the dissects Turkey right there between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, where Istanbul is. That was once a land bridge, and it collapsed, thereby releasing the water from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea in a dramatic way, like in an immediate way, right? And so and there were tribes living in the Black Sea area that were flooded, including Noah. Okay, and that's also incidentally why Noah's Ark ended up in the mountains of Turkey, right there, as the text in the Bible says. So anyway, that's amazing that this is actually 150 weeks, because it's 150 days in the flood, when after the 150 days, Noah's Ark landed in the mountains of Turkey. And that's what we're talking about. This is the exact location. The Moskva sank in the Black Sea. Wow. Didn't even know that till I started recording. Okay. Another thing I wanted to just emphasize on here is the reason for the border symbolism and Satan's agenda. Satan's agenda is communism and enslavement of people, but also trampling on their human rights, their God-given rights. And when a people no longer believe in God, they have their rights no longer come from God, they come from the government. And it's a law of the universe that, like the founders understood, people that do not fear God, not just believe in God, but fear God, when that's removed from a culture, it's inevitably like it's a law. It's like gravity that communism is the replacement. Totalitarianism is the replacement. That's the default state of humanity, and it was because of Christianity that exploded like a bomb, if you will, under the underneath the civilization of the West that just has been rippling out ever since, and so the culture that gave modern democracy and human rights is a result of Christianity. That's something even atheists should be able to appreciate, and many do. It's a fact, right? And so when you remove that, just like Nietzsche understood, Friedrich Nietzsche, he's famous for saying God is dead, but most people don't quote the entire quote. He said, God is dead, and it will take generations for us to wash the blood off our hands. That's because he understood very well what was coming. He was prescient. He understood what would the 20th century be, which was the bloodiest century in human history, as a result of the atheist movements, communism and Nazism, both forms of socialism, collectivism, which is again the inevitable result of the removal of Christianity from society. Okay, Nietzsche advocated creating, new values, but that's not possible. There are people that are not inclined to believe in the God of the Bible that are conservative and are attempting to, say this out loud, that we need to create new values again, but it's not going to happen. The God of the Bible is the true God, and the only way that humanity can live in peace is with God's rule. And anyway, so Satan's agenda is to remove the free will. That's what happens when with communism, collectivism, slavery, the free will. That's what I failed to emphasize earlier. The truth about the free will that God gave us and the opposite of it. And so we are placed in this world created in the image of God because we have free will, and Satan hates that. He's the enemy of God. The word Satan is Hebrew for adversary. God has purposefully placed Satan in the environment for a reason. He is the challenger, if you will, in order to teach us, because a plant can't grow without gravity pushing down on it, and likewise we cannot learn about the contrast between righteousness and unrighteousness and free will and slavery without the contrast. All right? And so in the environment of the contrast, we are offered the opportunity to choose. And that's essentially God's plan, is to create a creature that would love him of their own free will, including his ways and righteousness, and or not. And so that's why we are given the choice, and that choice comes through our free will, which is why we are created, or how we are created in God's image. And that is what Satan is working very hard to take away. That's why communism, socialism, all forms of it, all forms of collectivism is evil. Because socialism, in all of its forms, including high taxes, is involuntary. It's involuntary, it's theft, it's some people maybe for this or that, for the psychological benefit of feeling connected and the solidarity with their comrades or whatever, but there will always be those who don't agree, who are forced to go along with it. And inevitably, to make people go along with the plan requires the trampling of human rights, God-given rights, such as free speech. It is evil. And to the subject of this video, which is NATO and entangling alliances, this is a form of collectivism. It's communism is what it is. It's a collectivism. NATO is collectivism. And what it does, like communism does also, it produces an immature, childlike citizenry. Those who depend on the state instead of being independent and mature adults. And so what you have with NATO, with America taking on the responsibility of everyone's security, is you have these smaller nations in Europe that are dependent on that like little children. And like little children, they are petulant and immature and not self-sufficient and irresponsible. In other words, driving their economies into debt, which will lead to them becoming bankrupt and destroying their economies without protecting their border. And it leads to ridiculous feminine ideologies, because that's what socialism is. It really is a form of feminine thought, right? It's empathy, right? And it leads to them having immature, unreasonable, non-common sense policies that are just ideological, wishing the reality of the world is a certain way when it isn't, and opening up their borders to allow all of these immigrants to come in to radically transform their culture because, well, I mean, I don't even want to get into it, but you see what I'm saying is like, it just goes, one thing leads to another. It's all interconnected. And so the problem with Europe, one big problem about it is NATO. Because were these countries to take their own security seriously, they would take all kinds of other things seriously and stop being children, not even children, but infants with regards to certain things like migration and culture and high taxes and socialism, all of it, right? It's all going to come home to roost now. They're going to reap what they've sown. The whole thing is going to fall apart, and they are going to get what they asked for, which is the destruction of Western civilization. And it's going to happen really quickly. It's not going to take a long time, like some people think. It's going to happen overnight, and it's going to happen now. And but you could argue that one of the roots of it is one of the roots of the establishment of the one-party system, the left of center and not left of center, radical left political group that has dominated all of these European nations for all of this time, is the collectivism, socialism, communism of NATO, because they were not forced to take responsibility and be adults with their own borders. So they took their security for granted. They got into all kinds of nonsensical left ideologies that have destroyed their nations. But it's a cut flower civilization, right? It still looks good. It still looks like it is alive, like a flower that's been cut, but it's dying, and it's going to die rapidly. But just because it looks good right now doesn't mean it is completely rotten and dead underneath the surface, which it is. And that's all going to be exposed. It is being exposed currently. That's essentially what is happening right now in God's plan, is to expose all of this. Trump is being used to expose. Ultimately, he is the great exposer of all of the corruption and rot in Western culture, in Western civilization, including in Europe and with NATO. NATO is the root of it, and Trump is now exposing that with his approach to the Ukraine war, which is all about NATO. NATO is what caused the Ukraine war. If you don't know that, you need to learn, okay? It's not Putin propaganda, it's the truth. You need to learn. You don't know anything. Most people don't know much, actually, in general, and especially if you are getting your news from mainstream media and are on the left. You really don't know much at all about anything. And so it's time to start learning. And NATO is the root of the problem with the Russia-Ukraine war. And Trump is now exposing that, but also through the Ukraine war itself, exposing the rot that is NATO. And like I'm explaining in this video, NATO is what was behind the CVD disease. It's really that rotten. I know it's hard to believe for people that are all new to this, but it really is that rotten. And I know you won't believe it, and you'll label me a conspiracy theorist or whatever, which I am certainly not. I do not have that personality type. But the prediction will prove this. That is the purpose of this prediction. It is to prove what I have just said. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.